Hi there, my name is Melissa Scaramucci. I'm going to be reading an excerpt of my novel Montesol, and I will start with a brief critical introduction and finish with a wrap-up outro. To begin, my creative project Montesol is a novel in progress set on the titular fictional island in the Caribbean. Parts of the island nation have been sold to a developer, Astrid Ashcroft, who carves out a special economic zone called Aperta Bay. Since Aperta Bay operates outside the bounds of any world government's laws or regulations, it is a haven for a variety of colonizers, including pure libertarians, medical tourists, criminals, dark web operators, and bankers. In the novel, Aperta Bay is expanding to lure the lucrative cruise industry away from the traditional ports in the capital city of La Palma. These are some examples of the contemporary Western colonization practices the indigenous characters are seeking to disrupt in this chapter. This fictional island holds a native population that has survived and resisted over centuries of extractive colonial invasions. Like many real islands in the Caribbean, the First Nations populations were almost totally eradicated, then blended with colonizers and enslaved African indigenous peoples. The remaining indigenous mixed-race people who survived the collapse of slavery in the 19th century, the retreat of European monarchical rule in the mid and late 20th centuries, are now facing the 21st century colonial powers of offshore banking, crypto mining, and tourism. The chapter engages with a series of indigenous theories in the creation of the setting and characters and drives the motivations for the characters and scenes. From Gerald Weisner, I explore trickster discourse, the comic holotrope, and nonlinear storytelling, along with his theories of the long gaze and manifest manners. Huanani and Mililani Trask corroborate Weisner with their critique of tourism and the dilution of indigenous ceremonies for entertainment in Hawaii. Dean Rader's theories of engaged resistance is deployed as the characters worked to protect their land and autonomy. And finally, this is a cosmopolitan story, as theorized by Arnold Krupat and guided by the work of Simon Ortiz and his insistence that language and adaptability are sites of indigenous endurance. And so, an excerpt from the chapter titled, "The Mostly True Story of How Jorge Became a Martyr," finally. Jorge slipped out of bed and relieved himself in the pre-dawn dark of his yard. Like all women, Ursula preferred he use the toilet, and he did, while relishing the freedom of pissing alone into the jungle line that threatened to overtake their small garden. Leaning one hand against a tall, curving royal palm, Jorge stretched his toes inside his foam rubber slides and arched into the Velcro vamp, hearing it pop and strain like his back in the pleasant morning cool. Shaking off and rolling his shoulders, he looked east towards the ocean as his plans for the day began to populate his mind. Ursula was still sleeping, undisturbed by his absence, so he decided to dress quickly and head towards High Street for his breakfast instead of lighting up the kitchen and waking the house. He was alone in his family in the need for a morning meal. His teenage son Russell would trade infinite bowls of porridge, salted fish, or even his favorite guava pastelitos for a few more minutes of sleep, and Ursula's brain ran best on wiry, lean precision buoyed only by strong black coffee. He, however, used his body, and his body demanded care. He was taught it would be irresponsible to show up to his job site at Aperta Bay without feeding his muscles protein and energy to fuel the work. He crept back to the bedroom and gathered his work clothes and boots from yesterday from the old cane chair. He grabbed fresh socks, boxers, and an undershirt from the top of the laundry hamper in the corner and walked as quietly as a big man could towards the main room of his house. Sitting on the iron daybed that stood in for a couch, Jorge pulled on his work jeans, stiff with sweat and splattered with flecks of plaster and paint. Over the past 4 years of building Aperta Bay, he had convinced Ursula to allow him to rotate between 2 pairs of jeans over 2 weeks and then switch to 2 others. She couldn't stomach him wearing dirty clothes to work, even as she saw that his work was messy and he enjoyed it. Somehow letting his jeans rest for a day, even when he didn't, allowed her some peace of mind and made the laundry load more bearable. He thought of their argument last night, with some regret, which he pushed from his mind as useless. Their conflicts had grown along with the condos he built for Astrid Ashcroft in Aperta Bay. He could hold his love for his wife and her ideals along with his paycheck. Ursula, increasingly, could not. He locked the barred screen door behind him in a hush and made his way over to the high street, beckoned by fresh smells of grease and coffee. The main drag of his little village, Lonbray, only stretched for a couple of blocks, but garnered her name because of the road and the lottery store. Situated on the east side of the island nation of Montesol, the town was only about 30 minutes away from the capital, but a world away in reality. There were no half-naked Junkanoo girls selling photos and rum shots here, no glass and concrete luxury shops or authentic Caribbean restaurants selling grouper tacos for $24. Here the chickens were still sleeping on low corrugated tin roofs. The surf was a low murmur on his right as he walked down the middle of the paved road into town. Maybe he would take Ursula for a picnic dinner and a swim tonight, lure her away from her laptop in anger. The two-story structures that rose on each side of him were painted in bright blue, bright orange, bright white chunks of plaster peeking out where the paint chipped. The retractable garage doors were closed on all but one storefront, and Tito's belly laugh beckoned Jorge further towards breakfast. The smell of fresh fried bacon crackled in Jorge's nose as he walked past rusty carousels of chips and candy to the back of the bodega. Tito was a magician in his small galley, producing everything from bacon and eggs to porridge and Cuban sandwiches over a countertop griddle, a microwave, and a propane burner, while surrounded by flammable stacks of styrofoam containers and plastic bags of bread. A crock pot of porridge shared an outlet with an oscillating desk fan. The chaos of the shotgun strip of a store contained solutions to the needs of the citizens of Lonbray. Tito supplied breakfast and lunch along with aspirin and one size of diapers. His inventory, like his food, would do in a pinch. Tito was laughing with his wife Sunny, which sent another little zip of remorse towards Jorge's heart. Sunny and Ursula had grown up together, and no one was prouder of Ursula going to university off-island than Sunny. Postcards and pictures from their correspondence 20 years ago were tacked and fading around her register perch at the front of the store. One of his favorite pictures of his wife, Ursula standing with the Prime Minister in front of her office building in town from the newspaper, was framed and hung on the wall next to a print of Jesus. They had the same Chamber of Commerce picture at home, gifted to Sunny, by Sunny, to her friend. "Get out of here, Jorge. I only have 5 dozen eggs. Not enough for you," Tito teased, his deep voice softened with the lyrical lilt of the island. "What brings you here so early?" "Look who beat the morning to work," Sunny added as she brought in bakery trays of pastelitos. Their warm and sweet fragrance, mixed with the bacon, brought an audible rumble to Jorge's stomach. "Give this man something quick before he jump behind that counter and take it for himself." Tito was already spooning mush into a foam bowl, which he passed over his wife's head to Jorge. "How is your family? How is your wife?" Tito asked as he turned back to his bacon. Sunny made a point of avoiding Jorge's eyes as she transferred the pastelitos from the bakery tray to the countertop acrylic display box. "I guess you talked to Ursula last night?" Jorge pressed Sunny. Sunny snapped the acrylic door back into place and tucked the empty bakery rack behind the counter. She took time brushing imaginary crumbs from her purple and orange monstrous print blouse. She pulled the elastic waistband of her long dark purple skirt and tucked in her shirt. Jorge noted he wished men could wear such comfortable clothes and fingered the leather belt around his own waist. Sunny clocked him, patting his belly as she tapped her head wrap. "Everyone on island is stressed and excited about the siren docking," she started. "My wife especially," Jorge said as he ate the savory bowl of sweet mush mixed with warm mashed plantains and fish. Tito lifted a spatula and dropped one over medium egg, followed by a second, on top of Jorge's bowl. Jorge cut the yolks into the remaining mush and dashed hot pepper sauce over his breakfast. "The maiden voyage of the largest cruise ship in the world docks at Montesol. Tomorrow will be a mania. Even we will be closed to go help Angelique at the bar," Tito said. 5,000 people, and we get them for 2 days, not just a few hours. That means crew coming too. Big man, Mr. Romantic. They're going to want reggae and rum, and Ursula, she just wanted to protect her things. Jorge grunted into his bowl. He didn't know how much to share with Sunny and Tito. Ursula hadn't sworn him to secrecy, but she wasn't even 100% sure of her information. If she was right, this would be the last year the cruise ships would dock at the Montesol capital city, La Palma. She suspected the Prime Minister of allowing Astrid to start construction on a new dock at Aperta Bay that would redirect all the ships towards her city. If he did, the entire tourism industry that supported Montesol at La Palma would die, flourishing instead in Astrid's special economic zone. The cruise ships already built and staffed their own souvenir and jewelry shops, but there were still plenty of opportunities for the native islanders to run their own ancillary businesses. Ursula felt like her work building Montesol Futures Foundations was at odds with Aperta Bay development and the cruise industry. The Prime Minister had convinced most of the island that allowing Astrid Ashcroft to build and operate an independent community would be good for everyone by bringing new jobs not tied to the tourism industry. Jorge agreed. Ursula saw the bay as one more way for foreigners to extract cheap labor and pollute their island home. And now Astrid wanted to gobble up the ships as well, so the tension at home was reaching a breaking point. She doesn't like seeing Russell working the beaches with his friends. She doesn't like seeing me working for Aperta Bay. I don't know what she expects me to do, Jorge said. He wasn't ashamed of his work, and he knew in his heart that's not what Ursula wanted him to feel. She was comfortable with him quitting and risking unemployment rather than working for that woman. But Ursula hadn't grown up barefoot. Scarcity was just a concept to her. Sonny and Tito exchanged looks. Jorge knew they also struggled with the tourism industry and the arrival Astrid in her zone. Lombre was the closest village to Aperta Bay, and almost everyone in town worked for Astrid in one way or another. On the surface, the two couples agreed with Ursula's plan for economic independence. She wanted the people of Montesol to own and operate the luxury condos and hotels, not just erect and clean them. She wanted to see families build wealth owning the fancy beach clubs instead of serving in them. And she especially wanted her son away from the petty criminals who owned all the jet skis and water toys. The money was too easy for him to turn down, and he rejected his mother's fears as overblown. She couldn't make him see that the line from selling dangerous rides to dangerous drugs to rum-drunk tourist was risky. He still thought the beach guys were all upside, and she couldn't compete with the fun or the money. Jorge finished his coffee thinking he should connect his young son Domenico with Russell. Maybe Russell would listen to him. Even Ursula would agree that working construction with his family would be better than shaking down tourists. Do you remember when she came back from the UK? She wouldn't have anything to do with no boys. Her heart and head so full of dreams for this island. I remember when you first met, Sonny mused. At the regatta, Tito offered. No, at her mama's funeral, Sonny scolded. No, at the regatta. We were working the docks, tying off boats, tossing guidelines, and she was on some big boat with 4 engines, and I can't remember his name. And Mr. Romantic here says, I'm gonna marry that girl. And I told him he better get in line because it looks to me like she's already matched, Tito said. No, at her mama's funeral, and she'd like to never take her eyes off Jorge. She was all cried out and so tired, and she didn't even want to go to the church lunch. But I made her, and she'll always thank me for that. And she sat at that table with her plate and just watched. Him so big and helping with the chairs and setting up the tables and taking care of his auntie. I never forget she asked me his name that day, Sonny insisted. And now you're both wrong because I know my own self. I saw her at a beach party right when she moved back. Your party, Sonny. You had it for her and everyone was drinking and dancing and she was too. She was fun, but also I could tell she was real smart and bossy. And I knew that that night that I saw her, that I would marry her. Jorge recalled the night with a smile. How could 3 people have 3 different memories of the same thing, Sonny wondered. I bet we could do the same with you too, Jorge offered. No, we aren't as mysterious, Sonny laughed. I guess not, Jorge said into his empty bowl. Sonny reached across the counter to take it from him and squeezed his hand. She's fighting so much. By now it feels natural. You know she's working so hard, always trying to protect the island, and you know not everyone can see her vision. Don't take it too personally. The sun was coming through the front door as a few more people came in, lured as Jorge was by the good smells. He paid Sonny and extracted a promise from her to check in on Ursula later in the day. Jorge walked back down the middle of the high street to meet his fellow construction workers outside of town. They all walked almost 2 miles to the carpool stop, where they were met daily by a disgruntled security guard tasked with driving the overburdened white van to the job site. Astrid hated seeing all the cars of her workforce lined up along her street, so she made riding into work from an off-site a condition of their labor. Of the 15 or so construction guys from the immediate area, only a handful had cars, so they would likely have been walking anyway. He was pleased to see his little cousin, Domenico, waiting for him at the end of the street. Jorge was anxious that most of his crew would call out sick today while really helping family or friends prepare for tomorrow over in La Palma. Seeing Nico was a good sign. What's good there, little cousin? Jorge sang out. No time to be lazy today, big cousin. Too many jobs, too much anxiety to sleep. I gotta try to work for all the family in one day. Uncle wants me back after lunch to harvest coconuts in the jungle, Domenico said in a rush. Jorge was prepared for this. In fact, he figured most of his crew and fellow foremen would come to him with similar arguments, and he wouldn't keep them from their side hustles. As long as they got that 18th floor ready for the walkthrough, he would stay in cover for as many of his friends and family as possible, if it even came down to anyone checking in on him. After so many years, he had worked his way up from day labor to carpentry to foreman to construction manager. If Astrid Ashcroft, or worse, her stepbrother Tom, chose today to ride the nerve-wracking ride up the 18th floor on the janky exterior elevator, he'd be ready. That's the end of that section of the chapter. Hopefully, you can see how Indigenous theoretical frameworks illuminate the creative, intellectual, environmental, and political stakes of Montesol. The chapter excerpt demonstrates how Indigenous peoples adapt and survive through humor, familial relationships, aesthetic resistance, and cosmopolitanism, rather than through narratives of disappearance or defeat. By foregrounding trickster discourse, engaged resistance, linguistic survivance, and the fluid exchanges that shape Caribbean Indigenous identities, Montesol refuses the containment imposed by manifest manners and the long gaze of colonial history. As all stories are for the listener and not the teller, I hope to convey a critique of contemporary modes of labor extractions, hyperreality, destructive ecological practice, and global capitalist systems. The Indigenous characters affirm survivance, agency, and adaptability as they engage in the ceaseless work towards the often promised and retracted goal of sovereignty. Thank you.